Good morning, everyone. This is Ranger Jake here in Yellowstone National Park, and today we're filming in Mammoth Hot Springs area. Over my shoulder we have Mount Everett's in the background, and I'm joined today by our bear management biologist, Kerry Gunther, and that's because today we're going to be talking about the past, present, and future of bear management in Yellowstone. So I want to thank you for joining us in this next installment of our 150th anniversary virtual video series. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump behind the camera and we'll get started, and we'll let Kerry take it away. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, thanks. So Yellowstone National Park was established in 1872, and it was set aside primarily to protect the geysers and the thermal features, and bears and other wildlife really weren't one of the primary considerations when the park was established. However, bears quickly became one of the park's primary attractions. Early in the park's history, hotels were built in some of the geyser basins, and garbage management was quite a bit different back then, and so the garbage from the hotel kitchens was just dumped right out back behind the hotel. By the early 1890s, the park superintendent was reporting that large numbers of black bears had begun to congregate to feed on the garbage piles behind these hotels. And then within a few years, the superintendent was also reporting that large numbers of grizzly bears were now also congregating at those garbage piles. So park visitors would come, tour the geyser basins, come back to the hotel in the evening for dinner, and then just before dark would go out to watch bears feed on the garbage behind the hotels. And this became so popular with park visitors that the National Park Service actually formalized the procedure and put in lunch counters for bears, as they called them, and they would take the choicest barrels of kitchen scraps and dump them on a platform, and then had log bleachers that visitors could sit in, and hundreds of people a night could sit and watch bears feed on garbage. By 1910, the first report of black bears panhandling for human food handouts along park roads were reported by the superintendent. So even before we had motorized vehicles in the park, bears were learning to beg for human food handouts from park visitors traveling through the park in horse and wagon. And then this quickly took off as a primary tourist attraction, and Yellowstone National Park became known as a place where you could see bears up close, you could interact with bears, you could feed bears, you could use food to lure bears into interesting positions for photographs. And from that point on, Yellowstone really became known as kind of a bear park. Management of our developed areas and campgrounds was also quite a bit different. We didn't have bear-proof garbage cans or dumpsters. We didn't have bear-proof food storage lockers. And there were no ordinances initially preventing people from feeding bears. And so grizzly bears and black bears would come into the developments and the campgrounds and usurp food from park visitors, sometimes taking their food right off the picnic table as the visitors ran away. Having all these bears that were conditioned to human foods, getting fed by visitors, they were habituated to the presence of people, interacting so closely with park visitors also led to a lot of bear-human conflicts. So from the 1930s, when the park began keeping good records, up through the 1960s, we were averaging 138 bear-caused property damages per year, typically damage to people's vehicles, camping equipment, tents, buildings, mostly with bears trying to get access to human food or garbage. And we were also averaging 48 bear attacks per year. So with 48 bear-inflicted human injuries per year, things were fairly dangerous. A lot of these injuries were relatively minor, but some were quite severe. And so the park began looking into efforts to try to reduce the number of bear-human conflicts and the number of bear-inflicted human injuries that were occurring in the park. Then in 1967 in Glacier National Park, 2 people were killed in 2 separate incidents in one night by 2 different grizzly bears. And that was really a wake-up call for the National Park Service that all the bear parks had to clean up the parks so that bears weren't getting into so many conflicts with people. So that led to Yellowstone National Park implementing a new bear management program in 1970. As part of that program, we closed all the garbage dumps in the park, and from that point forward, we began shipping our garbage out to incinerator in Livingston, Montana, well out of occupied grizzly bear habitat. We also bear-proofed all our garbage cans and dumpsters in the park. We began strictly enforcing regulations that prohibited recreational hand feeding of bears. We also converted our backcountry campsite system from dispersed camping, where you could pretty much camp anywhere you wanted in the backcountry. We converted to a designated backcountry campsite system where you got a permit for a specific campsite, and in each designated campsite we provided either a food storage pole or a food storage locker. And that really cleaned up our backcountry campsites of any conflicts with bears. We also began campground food security patrols each evening to make sure everybody put their food away, locked up in their car in a bear-proof manner. And we did several other things. We began carcass management, where we move carcasses. If an ungulated elk or a deer dies in a development or a campground, we'll move that so it doesn't attract bears into our developments and campgrounds or right next to the road, to try to reduce the number of interactions between bears and people. Now, bears had a tough time coping with the loss of the human food handouts and garbage, and so a lot of bears persisted in trying to obtain human food and garbage, and often damaged property in the process. So a lot of those bears were removed in management actions, and so that 1970 management program initially led to very high human-caused mortality, as these bears that had grown up mostly eating garbage were removed from the population if they couldn't figure out a way to persist on the native foods found in the park. We also saw that our cub production declined, so average litter size went down. The first age that adult females would have their first litter, that increased. Bears were older before they have their first litter. And then the interbirth interval, so the number of years between litters, also increased. And this was probably due to bears that were used to feeding on garbage, didn't have that garbage to supplement the native foods, and so they lost weight, and then cub production declined, and cub survival also declined during that period. And ultimately, this is what led to grizzly bears being listed as a threatened species in 1975. So for about the first 5 years of our new 1970 management program, things weren't going very well as far as the bear population was declining due to that high mortality combined with low cub production and survival. However, over time, we learned how to reduce human-caused mortality of grizzly bears in the park by preventing them from ever getting into human foods. Then they didn't cause conflicts, and so we didn't have to remove them in management actions. So eventually our population began to increase. Our females figured out how to more efficiently survive on the natural foods found in the park, and so cub production went back up to about what it was. Average age of first reproduction declined again down, so bears were having their first litters at a younger age, and then that interbirth interval also got shorter. So females were producing more litters and having better survival of those cubs.
Was that something that you guys predicted, thinking that once we do this, we are going to see these effects, but they're going to be somewhat short term and then they'll turn around? Or was it like, oh no, what did we do?
We did believe that there'd be high initial mortality. I think the mortality, though, was higher than anybody actually expected, even higher than what people expected. And so the Craighead brothers, who were doing research here at the time, believed that prior to the dump closures, there was about 222 to 245 grizzly bears in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, with most of those centered in Yellowstone National Park. After the high mortality associated with the dump closures, the Craighead brothers estimated that the population declined down to just 136 grizzly bears. So that mortality was higher. Even though people expected slightly higher mortality, they didn't predict that it would be as high as it was. And then once grizzly bears were listed as a threatened species, all the land and wildlife management agencies in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem began working together to conserve bears and reduce human-caused mortality and protect habitat. And so over time then, the population began to increase, and today population estimates are about 1,000 to 1,100 grizzly bears in the ecosystem, up from possibly as few as 136 in the mid-1970s. And when grizzly bears were listed as a threatened species in 1975, it was estimated that they occupied an area of about 6,000 square miles in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, so Yellowstone National Park and some of the wilderness areas surrounding the park. Today, the population occupies an area of over 26,000 square miles, so significant range expansion, to the point now where grizzly bears in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem are only about 65 kilometers from grizzly bears in the northern Continental Divide ecosystem. So in the next generation or two, we might get connectivity between the two populations.
And what's the benefit of that?
Genetically, you always worry about an island population due to effects of inbreeding. So if we can get these two populations connected, where bears can pass from one to the other, it would really help the population genetics on a long-term basis.
And do they think, like, I'm guessing the 65 kilometers is documented, and do we know, like, can you make an assumption or infer, like, you know, if we're documenting them this close, it's possible that they may even be closer or wandering in and out that we're just unaware of? Yes,
it'll take us time to discover once bears do interbreed between the two populations. So genetically, we can tell if they do. We are getting some reports of grizzly bears in between the two populations now, within that 65 kilometers. We can't always confirm those, but we're starting to see signs of it. So, you know, it likely will happen depending on how high the human-caused mortality is in that area.
Gotcha. Cool. So what else is going on today as far as, you know, what are, with all those things that we were doing in the past and then what we're doing today? I mean, what's a typical day for you out in the park, you know, regarding bear management? What's it look like these days?
Yeah, these days we have conflicts at a very low level. We'll have only 2 to 4 grizzly bear human conflicts in a year now, and some of those are pretty benign, where we used to have 138 conflicts a year. So we've really reduced the number of conflicts. We really jump on our management right away. So if a bear shows up in a development or in a campground, our dispatch will call us and we'll come haze the bear out using rubber bullets, beanbag rounds, or cracker shells. And we do a lot of food storage management. We're still doing food security patrols. We're installing bear boxes in all our roadside campgrounds. So we have almost 2,000 campsites. And we used to require that people just store their food in their car. But the more easy and convenient we make food storage regulations for park visitors, the more likely they are to comply. So by putting in a food storage box in every campground, it makes it real easy, so people can just throw all their food in the bear food storage box and they can go out and tour the park, and it keeps bears safe, and it also makes it easy and convenient for visitors to comply with that regulation. We're still doing a lot of carcass management. Nowadays, if an elk or a bison dies near a road or a campground, it might attract anywhere from half dozen to a dozen grizzly bears. So we move carcasses to places where bears can feed on them undisturbed by people. So the bears still get the nutrition, they still get the food, but not with 100 people within 10 or 20 yards trying to take pictures of them. And this keeps visitors safe as well.
And what about just like typical, like even when there's not a grizzly or not a carcass on the side of the road and bears are moving around, what's it like for a visitor coming, you know, viewing bears these days? What's some good practices that they should follow?
Yeah, seeing bears is very common today. So we'll get, thousands of reports a summer of people seeing bears. Some bears still get very used to people, but they're not getting human food. So they'll be feeding in the meadows right next to the road. And, those will create big bear jams where all kinds of people stop to view and photograph and just appreciate bears. And so what we ask in those situations, be considerate of the bear. The bear really just wants to be left alone. But, you can take your pictures and stuff. We just ask that all visitors maintain at least a 100-yard distance from bears. So if the bear is moving towards the road to cross it, don't get in front of it. Move away so you maintain that 100 yards. That makes it safe for the visitor, safe for the bear. Don't follow, approach, or encircle bears. A lot of times everyone wants a front row seat for a picture, so they'll form a big circle around a bear. Bears might get a little agitated and nervous if they feel enclosed in by that many people. So, treat the bear with respect. Think about the poor bear that's out there. He's a bear. He just wants to be left alone. He needs to be feeding in those meadows. So, don't be running. A bear that might cause a bear to chase you. Don't be yelling and making a lot of noise. When you're at a roadside traffic jam, be respectful of the bear and maintain that 100-yard distance.
And what about people in the backcountry? Is there any particular, or if you're hiking, if you're getting away from the road, is there any particular thing that we, want to impress on people?
Yeah, so backcountry hiking, we like to reduce injuries as much as possible. We currently average just 1 injury per year, and it's typically a surprise encounter, usually a solo hiker that has a surprise encounter with a female with cubs. And the female, she believes that the hiker is a threat to her cubs. She just wants to neutralize that threat, gather up her cubs, and leave. So you can reduce the odds significantly by, first of all, hiking in larger groups. So groups of 3 or more people are rarely ever injured by bears. So if you can just find 2 friends to hike with, you'll have significantly reduced the odds of being injured by a bear. Then when you're hiking, we ask everybody to carry bear spray. Bear spray is a very cost-effective method of diffusing aggression in bears. So it's a hot pepper solution that you spray out of a can if a bear's charging you. So we recommend that everybody hiking in the backcountry carry bear spray and know how to use it. And then another very cost-effective way of reducing the odds of being attacked by a bear in the backcountry is to make noise, especially in blind spots on the trail. So if you're coming up over a hill or around a tight corner in dense vegetation regrowth, give a couple shout outs, hey bear, just so the bear hears you coming so it has time to leave and disperse before you come around the corner and surprise it. If you do encounter a bear up close, what we recommend is, first of all, try slowly backing away. Often by putting a little bit of distance between you and that female with cubs, it'll diffuse the situation. Now that doesn't mean turn and run, because bears chasing that run. They're very predacious on elk calves, so they're used to running down things that run away from them. So you want to just slowly back away, and again, that distance you're putting between yourself and the female will often diffuse the situation. If the bear becomes agitated and charges, then you want to stop and stand your ground. By standing your ground, you're showing the bear that you're willing to defend yourself. And most of the time, if you stand your ground, the bear's going to either stop the charge short or veer off to the side at the last minute. And it usually won't follow through and make contact. Anytime you have a bear charging you, when it's 60 feet or closer, that's about the range of bear spray. So bear spray goes about 30 feet. But so when the bear's about 60 feet away, it's coming very fast. You want to start spraying, put a big cloud of bear spray in front of you, so the bear has to run through that cloud of bear spray, and then just keep emptying the bear spray into the bear's face. And bear spray is over 90% effective at stopping aggressive behavior in bears.
Awesome. So so we talked about the past and the present, and so I guess what are your hopes, for the future of bear management in Yellowstone National Park? What sort of things are we working on?
Well, we think with the way that our climate is warming, that our foods are going to change some. So we might lose some bear foods. We could gain some bear foods. Some bear foods are probably going to be less abundant. Others might become more abundant. So we really have to keep a close eye on this population. And again, bears, they're an omnivore generalist. They eat a lot of different things. Bears used to occupy habitat all the way from the Arctic Circle down into Mexico. So they're capable of surviving in a lot of different vegetation types, which actually that will help them with climate change, because they can survive in a lot of different climates with different vegetation. But they're always very vulnerable to human-caused mortality. So we're going to have to continually try to figure out ways to keep human-caused mortality to an absolute minimum in this ecosystem to try to conserve our bear population.
And how far away are we from all of the food storage containers in the park right now?
Yeah, with food storage containers, we currently have a bear pole or a food storage locker in all 300 of our backcountry campsites. And in the roadside car campgrounds, we have about 1,100 bear boxes installed, and we have about 2,000 campsites in the park. So we're probably still about 3 or 4 years we'll finish putting a bear box in every campsite in the roadside car campgrounds.
Awesome, that's good. So before we sign off, as someone who has worked in Yellowstone with bears for nearly 40 years, I feel like there might be some sort of a cool story or anecdote that you tell with friends when you're sitting around a campfire or something like that. I was curious if you have a story off the top of your head that you might share with our audience.
Well, yeah, boy, in 40 years I have a lot of stories. With bears, I think what I find so unique about bears is they're all individuals, and they're extremely intelligent. So they're a lot like humans. Unlike elk, all elk seem to do about the same thing, but each bear's an individual. and they have a personality, and bears will play and have fun. They'll be mad and upset. So it's just never a dull moment with bears, and they'll always surprise you. And in a lot of ways, they're actually very predictable, though, in how they respond to humans. I think park visitors are much more unpredictable than bears are.
All right. Well, we'll jump back on here. With that, I want to thank Kerry for joining us today for the next installment of our 150th anniversary video series. Thanks for talking to us about the past, present, and future of bear management. And thank you for your support for Yellowstone National Park, and we'll see you at the next video.